My decision-making criteria of everything I've ever done is based on the knowledge that I have a choice of response. The choice that I've made have been to use those things as a fueling mechanism as opposed to a debilitating disease.
Hello and welcome to Minter Dialogue, episode number 328. Today is Sunday the 19th of May 2019, and this interview is with Jonathan McDonald. Jonathan's a man who excels at many things, including being a CEO whisperer, inventor, investor, renowned black belt in kickboxing, and most recently, Jonathan is also author of the best-selling Powered by Change, which was published by Kogan, was a Sunday Times business book bestseller, and that won the Embracing Change Award at this year's Business Book Awards. Jonathan challenges himself to radically change his life every year. It's a most remarkable and inspirational story. Welcome to the Minter Dialogue podcast, where we discuss branding and all things digital. I am Minter Dial, your host, and you'll find the show notes on my eponymous site, minterdial.com. Enjoy the show. Jonathan McDonald, great to have you on the show. You and I shared one experience, which differed at the end by being finalists for the Business Book Awards, and you won with yours, Powered by Change. Of course, you cheated because you had change in the title and the category was Embracing Change. Jonathan, in your own words, how do you describe yourself?
I think that, apparently, according to Google now, I'm an author. Which is a bit of a shock. And my mum reminds me that because I'm now an award-winning best-selling author, I'm allowed to call myself one. But I've never been sure how to introduce myself at dinner parties. I tend to bumble on for about 3 minutes until the person I'm speaking to either gets bored or walks away or both. But I think my primary purpose in life is to expand the way that people think. And I've done that through multiple ways. And so I've had 9 startups, of which 3 of which worked, 6 of which were spectacular disasters, which my therapist calls learnings. I've been an investor into some things. I've had a good go at the professional keynote world, and so I think I'm a dabbler, a bit of a portfolio CV person. I'm massively unemployable, so I haven't had anywhere near as an illustrious career as you've had with people like L'Oreal and so forth. I think the nearest kind of few brushes with large corporations have always been as a private advisor. I'm a CEO whisperer in the background sometimes, and when those conversations have reached the stage of, what about coming on board and joining us? I meet their HR teams or I meet their C-suite, and I think we all mutually agree that I'm not really a payroll person. That's it. That's my short introduction of what I am.
That's great. Well, and Jonathan, you come with an amazingly interesting and rich history. So as much as you might have had failures, the richness and the learnings, as you say. So Powered by Change, how did you get this idea to come up with a book?
Well, it's my 5th book.
There you go. Sorry about that.
No, it's fine. Well, it's no. Well, when I tell you the sales figures, you will be sorry. The four prior ones were self-published and sold 3 copies in total, and I only realised last year they'd sold all to my mum. This one, I actually flipped a coin. Every year for 13 years, I flip a coin on New Year's Eve between 2 things that I'm either fundamentally unable to do, or untalented to do, or I'm scared of. And so about 2 years ago, I flipped a coin between becoming a best-selling author, which I had no evidence or ability to do from the last 4 books. And the other side of the coin was go to a Trappist monk retreat in Tibet for 4 months. And it landed on heads, and so I executed it. But I've equally flipped coins to get selected to a World Championships in a martial art I've never done before. That World Championship is in August this year in Florida in Jiu-Jitsu. I've become a boat captain. I've learned to speak 4 languages. I've radically forgiven all of my tormentors in the past, all from coin flips. So Powered by Change was a coin flip. And I just took all of my experiences in the past, how I have personally or observed companies or individuals choosing to choosing their response positively to change, or to stand firm in the winds of change and refuse to accept that things are perpetually in motion. And the book is essentially a a debrief of my 30 years in business as to the outcomes of those decisions.
That's brilliant. Well, Jonathan, so as I'm listening, I listened to the coin toss, and I wanted to put that in contrast to this idea of not being the victim, as you went through a whole journey in your life where you moved from this thought of being the victim towards taking responsibility or being accountable, and of course also becoming a black belt along the way. Tell me how you describe that difference between, let's say, the idea of the coin toss and taking accountability.
Well, I'm a huge Viktor Frankl fan, and one of the most salient phrases of his, which is constantly without even sounding too hyperbolic here, is constantly in the forefront of my mind, and that is that there's a gap between stimulus and response. And in that gap lies our growth and our freedom. And my decision-making criteria of everything I've ever done is based on the knowledge that I have a choice of response. And from being abused for 11 years as a child through to having 2 sets of business partners turn completely rogue and eventually screw me over, the choices of response that I've made have been to use those things as a fueling mechanism as opposed to a debilitating disease. And I think that in my past, the coin flips that I've done are a manifestation of the choice that I can have. So choosing between things that I am scared of or unsuitable for, and then having a heads and a tails like that, and then it landing and then executing. I've executed every single coin flip outcome. Is when people say to me, well, how can you do that? I give the same answer as to when I was stabbed at 16 and bleeding out on the floor, almost dying by one of my childhood tormentors. The choice that I had, despite feeling the extreme warmth of the embrace of death, I felt that I actually chose to live, and I've chosen to survive, and I've chosen to pursue. And the coin flips is a choice. Once the heads or tails outcome, because life is like that. Flips happen. Things land on heads sometimes. They land on tails sometimes. A lot of the situations we're in, we're not necessarily suitable for, or we're not necessarily authorized to do, or we're scared of. That's life. And so I think my coin flip mentality is simply a manifestation of my choice of response, to paraphrase Frankl.
In search of meaning. Yeah. I mean, that's a brilliant response, and I didn't expect anything less, Jonathan. Because at the end of the day, one could have said, well, it's just a flippant flip of the coin. But your injection of the 2 sides in advance is really where the choice is happening.
That's correct. I think the choice, I let randomness and uncertainty and serendipity happen, and then I choose my response to be one that enables me to evolve. And that's pretty much my mindset on that.
Well, very brave. And do you have like a ceremony around this, or do you sort of, do it with a cognac on the side, or
other than sacrificing the odd goat? No, I tend to do it very privately and without fanfare. So it's only in the last year that anyone, and I mean anyone, as in any single human being, not even my closest friends or partners or family, anyone has known about coin flips. I only started telling people because I got into this martial art. That when it landed on the martial arts one, I started training 13, 14 times a week for 7 months as a white belt in the hardest martial art, and the one I've never done. And for 7 months, up until the British Nationals last year, where I won the heavyweight championship, people were asking where I was all the time. And unlike that, with all the other coin flips, I've managed to hide what I'm doing in plain sight. I'll occasionally post something online about a new activity or a new language I'm learning or a new skill I'm learning. And this one I couldn't hide because I was in the dojo every day. So no one, it was unavoidable. And eventually I said, okay, right, this is what I'm actually doing. It's because the coin landed on heads.
So one of the things, Jonathan, that of course is very powerful and powered by change is your personal story that got you to where you are, where you have Jesper Brodin, the CEO of IKEA, talking or doing the preface and obviously you working for them and with them. Mm-hmm. At what point did you come out? Because if you were 11 years abused like that, mm-hmm. I have to imagine that it was sort of in a secret, shameful place somehow. If no one was there, no adults were, including your parents, weren't able to help you through that.
Yeah, I think. But in reverse, the first thing to mention is that after I was given up at birth. On the day I was born, I was taken immediately into an orphanage and then into various foster homes, and I was eventually adopted. My shame of being different and being outcast was essentially validated by the first ever day at school being stabbed in the hand with a pencil by one of the older kids. And in fact, it's I still have the lead in my right hand to this day. I call it my first tattoo, and I hid as much as I could. I hid broken bones. I hid bruises. I said that I was I'd fallen over in playgrounds, or I'd run into a tree, or run into a door, or whatever. So I hid it as much as I could. Sometimes I didn't hide it, and my parents' attitude was quite far along the line of, well, you know, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger type thing, and man up and fight back. The teacher's viewpoint of what was going on was to have an assembly and call out the bullies' names to bring them up to the front of the school, which meant that then 10x'd the torment. And then I after my childhood had passed, I ended up getting into relationships with women who I unwittingly had basically found the most attractive bullies I could, but bullies nonetheless. And I'm a narcissist magnet, so I tend to find somehow psychopaths kind of hone me out and find an easy route in, or found an easy route in the past. But I think I never really wanted to tell anyone about these things until possibly 3-4 years ago, 5 years ago perhaps, where I mentioned something on stage to a group of people, I think a group of school kids, and the effect was so strong that I realized that it served a massive benefit to some people to hear the accounts of someone who was maybe experiencing something, unfortunately, that they were. And I never saw this as anything that could benefit others. I saw this as a private hell. And it turns out now that the private hell is actually a glimmer of hope for those who are in their own dark versions.
Well, it certainly makes for an authentic, revealing story, and therefore just makes you so much more approachable and believable.
Well, thank you. Well, I guess that's an outcome of it as well, but I say it with all humility when I say that I'm genuinely honoured that people find it of interest or of value, because it's certainly not for promotion. In fact, I feel somewhat of an imposter. It's why joke about the author thing. Writing about my personal story, Empowered by Change, was something that I had no intention of doing until the publishers said, well, you've mentioned this a few times on stage. This would really make the book personal. And I begrudgingly wrote that chapter, and it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But even harder was reading it out for the Audible version. And reading out the account of my own childhood was exactly like living through it again.
Well, it certainly is powerful. It made me think, Jonathan, about how often people who espouse ideas of purpose and the importance of people, there's some common thread that seems to be that they have had a life-changing experience that has led them to the power of purpose, or in any way the integrity and the intentionality of purpose. Do you believe it? Have you observed the same thing? And then the second follow-up will be, to what extent that then becomes necessary for people finally to convert?
Well, the first part is easier for me to talk about, because essentially, if you take Joseph Campbell's monomyth, or otherwise known as the hero's journey, described, albeit slightly confusingly, in A Hero with a Thousand Faces, but Campbell's hero's journey, I think, accurately describes how myths are constructed and also human life tends to run. So we start with a call to an adventure. We then kind of somehow have some form of supernatural aid, whether it's something that's esoteric or something unforeseen, and then we go into our kind of abyss, where we have these challenges and we have these horrible moments where we fight our demons, and then there's a kind of a rebirth and a transformation that enables us to return to the world as it used to be, but with this new understanding. And so that's the way that life seems to be. And sometimes we don't realize it's happening to us, but I doubt that anyone who's listening to this hasn't gone through their own challenges and has learned from them. And so to the second point, I think that I find stories that are journeys are the most believable, but I'm not sure I would say that all stories need to have such a journey. Some stories can be something that is an observation without actually being on the journey themselves. People could look at a journey from a helicopter and plot out a route through the Amazon, and does David Attenborough actually go through all of the ice caps on his own, or the jungles on his own, or does he actually have photographers and explorers who do that, and then he can observe? I think it's valid either way. And believe me, in my past, I wish that I'd been able to observe as much as I've had to experience. But now I realise that the journey is actually the destination in itself. And without being too cliched, my place in time now is a result of the hell that I've had to go through, and also then found the joys of it all. And I'm massively grateful for the crap that I've been dealt.
Yeah. So you did say in the beginning that you have gone through I can't remember the qualifying word, but an epic forgiveness.
Yes.
Tell us, the radical forgiveness. Tell us what that looks like and how you've done it.
Well, when the coin flip in 2009 landed, I mean, the thing that I just could not get my head around doing, on both sides of the coin, heads was this radical forgiveness, which was physically going to meet everyone that had ever treated me badly and look them in the eye and say, I totally forgive you and thank you for helping me grow. That was the line. And I managed to find about 80% of the people, and 20% I couldn't get in touch with, and I tried and tried and tried. I've knocked on doors, I scoured social media and stuff like that. But anyway, eight in 10, and there was about 25 people, so maybe 20 out of the 25, I think. It's horrible. I mean, the first guy was the guy that stabbed me in the stomach when I was 16. And I met him, I met his daughter, I met his wife, I met his mum, and on his request, I met him first, and then he introduced me to the rest of his family. And it is, I don't know if you've ever juiced or just had a raw food diet and detoxified yourself in your past, but it's synonymous with, or it's very similar to detoxifying your entire system. And I was not aware until then, 2009, that I was carrying around all of the darkness. Yeah, and the darkness of the negativity and the resentment, the remorse, the sadness, the pain. I'd actually inherited their negativity. Every punch I received, every one of my broken bones, every time I was hit with a baseball bat and my head bashed against fire extinguishers, every time that happened, there's an energy transference of negativity into me. And when I forgave everyone, or those that I could find, the negativity instantly goes. And I still practice radical forgiveness to this day. I'm even as we speak, I'm involved in something that is from an extremely negative individual who is hell bent on causing me as much harm as possible, including defamation of character and all manner of things. And my view is to just radically forgive them and say, I'm sure you have your reasons. I'm not going to own your story, but you also need to know that this isn't going to be something that I inherit from you. This is something that only you can carry. I'm not willing to carry the negative, and I forgive you for everything you're doing and everything you've done. And it's wonderful.
It's your problem.
Yes.
What about the effect then on those that you forgave? Because you mentioned this chap who then introduced you to his entire family. I mean, the narrative in my head is, oh God, I'm really embarrassed. This guy I forked in the stomach when we were 16 years old or whatever, and now he's coming and he's forgiving me. I have to believe I was a real dick. Maybe I still am. And this is the words that are going through my mind. So explain what actually happens.
Well, they are different reactions. In no particular order, 2 people went to rehab because of the radical forgiveness. One of them actually was still a criminal and went and radically apologized to the last 4 people that they had committed a crime to. I had 6 people try and attack me out of the 20 or so. So the spectrum ranges from it being a life-changing positive outcome to a perpetuity of the negative. And but even in that, you see, I can't force an outcome and don't even want an outcome. The radical forgiveness was one of literally forgiving. It was giving back what had been given to me in negativity, to allowing them to own it rather than me to own it. And I reminded everyone that they have a choice as to what to do with it. And I prefer to be a lighthouse rather than a tugboat. So I didn't do this so that I could show them the error of their ways. I did this so that they could see that there's a different way of living through them owning their own stuff, but also so I could not carry around this backpack of darkness. And so, yeah, different reactions from different people. It was quite telling, actually, the type of people that they are genuinely, or at least that they're genuinely fronting. I think that behind all the darkness, unless you're a psychopath or a sociopath, behind the darkness there is a glimmer of light. It's just sometimes extremely well covered.
Well, I'm writing a new book, and I think that one of the pieces in it, I'm not sure how much it's going to end up being, but it is the suggestion that we all have darkness, and that our journey, to use your phrase, is about learning how to accept that darkness within, let's call the light, or at least within our personality, and without needing to dive into it to become some musician or big artist, which way typically more obvious type of conjoinment. But if you were in any day business, everybody has a private side, and probably something that, let's say, society might frown on if it were considered to be exposed.
Yeah, I think we're really talking about yin and yang, aren't we? So at the end of the day, if we have a dark, bright, kind of negative, positive dualism, then we all do have these contrary forces, but they can be complementary and interconnected and interdependent and so forth to themselves. And I that's why I mentioned about the darkness that's just covering over where the light is. You could argue that there is a lot of there's an internal battle that we have and an opportunity that we have to choose which path within us we follow, and so I feel that's a positive, but I think it's very realistic that to have the duality inside it. Otherwise, this is similar to the fact that a day has there's a bit with the sunshine and a bit in darkness, and we have we can sit in the darkness and feel that it's that's all we have, but in fact that the darkest part is just before the dawn, and then we have this opportunity, and sometimes people, and I've certainly been in that in my life in this way in my life. Sometimes people, these are those who can choose, by the way. Sometimes people choose to maintain that darkness,
like the 6 people you went to.
Yeah. Yeah, and whereas there are other people who don't necessarily have the psychological capability to choose that, and and that place, which now in various different terminologies is called depression, is something that I think should be brought more to the forefront of public awareness and medical practice, because it is not always as simple as saying, well, I choose not to feel to be inside my dark place. I choose to snap out of it. And of course, in various different psychoses and mental balances, there isn't always an available choice when there's actually a mechanical and biological and chemical structural issue, and that's very different than someone saying, "Oh, I feel really depressed today." It's different than what depression actually is.
So I think this makes for a nice pivot to talk a little bit about what actually is, let's say from the business point of view, what Powered by Change is all about. The subtitle is How to Design Your Business for Perpetual Success. And clearly you're in a good place to be talking about this. You've also spent time working with some of the largest, best known companies on this. And you use this idea of the windmill principle. So
the windmill theory.
Yeah. Tell us what that is.
Well, I think one of the things that the starting point of that was an ancient proverb that I read a long time ago called "When the winds of change are blowing, some build a wall and others build windmills," and I found that fascinating to think about, and I realised that there's a similarity between that ancient proverb and how I've noticed the activities and behaviours and the thoughts of companies. And
not to mention certain presidents.
Well, yes, and prime ministers. So I think my starting point for Powered by Change was the windmill, the wall windmill paradox, the wall windmill choice, if you like. And I then discovered over my years that there were 4 areas which the attitude shift or choice comes to play in if we were to use change as a positive fueling factor. Now, for change to be a fuel and change to be a wind, the analogy kind of stretches that to be powered by change, we need to power our windmill. And the four blades of that windmill are purpose, people, product, and process, which are the four sections, the four areas in which I've noticed companies either are void of or lacking in the correct tooling to be powered by change, or they are excelling. And if you're excelling in all four areas, then you are powered by change, truly. And if you have only three of your blades working, then your windmill can't be as well powered by change. And if you have none of your blades working, then you've just got a very high built wall. And so I've that in the book, rather than being too it sounds very kind of wishy-washy and analogous, but in the book I have over maybe 1,000 case studies of what I actually mean by that, and I name names and you
do. It's very concrete.
Yeah. So and I think that's why Jesper from IKEA wrote the foreword, because his company was one of the first that I explained the windmill theory to, and then helped them over 6 years to grow from the $30 to $40 billion euro turnover that they're in, and we've had all kinds of. I mean, they have a windmill department and all kinds of things named after the bits of the book now. It's awesome.
It is. So, I mean, let's say that from my experience, the largest swath of companies tend to think they have a great product or delivering some kind of great service. They have been going to business schools and learning how to do processes and getting procedures in place and all this. It seems to me that the often the most lacking is purpose, but the second one right behind it is having the right people. Not necessarily, they can all be good, but they just not be the right people for your culture. Is that your observation? Because you do say that all four are needed, and I was wondering to what extent you would modulate that.
Well, all four are needed, and in fact they are interdependent, because if you have from a personal level and a corporate level, a clearly defined purpose, the why and the what, and that is well defined and everyone knows, but you don't have the right people, process, or products, or people, products, and process.
The how.
Then what you end up with is a lot of people without the how and nothing to execute. If you have the purpose and the people, and the people, I mean the people who are aligned to their own purpose that's resonant to your purpose, and the people with the willingness to try and experiment and learn and evolve, but you don't have the right products, and by products I mean anything that's produced, including services. If you don't have a matched product set or processes, then you end up with frustration. If you have the right process, the purpose, and the right people, and you've got kick-ass products and services, but you don't have any processes in place, then what happens? You go bankrupt because nothing actually comes to market. And if you have all of the four together, you've enabled an internal resonant purpose that runs across an organization and into the consumer world, if we're looking at it from a B2C perspective. And you then have a range of products that are actually manifestations of that purpose or services. And then you have the processes that enable these things to happen in a porous way that can actually link the resonance together from an intrapersonal perspective, an interpersonal perspective, and an extrapersonal perspective. You can be powered by change to such an extent that, despite the fact that today's the slowest pace of change we'll ever experience, you can grow and grow and grow due to your four blades working together. And that's why they're needed.
One of the things you mention is this notion of an empowering mechanism. And in companies, there certainly, as they get bigger, the idea of process and procedures and checks and balances tends to bear down on the ability to empower down the ranks.
Indeed.
What is the key to making that empowerment happen? I mean, in your observation, working with these companies, what makes for that to work? It's a great idea, but won't work here.
Yeah, well, actually, funny enough, one of the the precursors to the process blade that I speak of is that this isn't a thing of, hey, let's just get loads of processes in place. That's commercial suicide. This is not about proceduralizing things to their nth degree. That's crazy talk. The processes that I'm talking about are processes that enable things to be powered by change and enable our people to express and have permission to experiment, etc. And so it's sadly, process has a bit of a bad rap, because you get a good old Big Four consultant in to over process the whole thing and everything grinds to a halt, or you have board sanctions that say that we need a process for this and this and this and this and this, and we can only have 4 meetings or 5 meetings before this decision is made. That's not a process that's suitable for change. Processes that are suitable for change are ones that are flexible enough but rigid enough at the same time to withstand the stretch of change, but without the randomness that can come from a kind of a shrugged shoulder process, which is like, well, it doesn't really matter what happens because everything changes. So we actually need to find a balance, and with all paradoxes, this isn't a binary kind of we need no processes or we need loads of processes. What we need to do is actually find a balance of procedural ways that we can be powered and empowered. And so my process blade, I cringed when I wrote the word process, in fact, because I knew that it would come across as, hold a minute, process kills organizations. But actually what I go into in that section is that, well, I can give you a dozen or so, or maybe 100 dozen examples of when lack of process really, really kills organizations, but also wrong processes kill organizations. It's the same as anything since the dawn of innovation. Fire on demand was our first human innovation, and you can take fire on demand to heat your cave, or you can take fire on demand to kill your enemies. You could heat your food so you don't die of diseases, but equally you can burn yourself. And so process is the same. We can use it to heat our caves, and we can use it to beat competition. But if we abuse process and we have the wrong processes, then we burn ourselves.
Something you mentioned about your success, Jonathan, I believe it was you said it was not to listen to everybody and to have too many people's ideas.
Yes.
I latched onto that because, I mean, at the end of the day, there's all this notion of consensuality and listening to everybody. But underneath that sounds like, and don't take this wrong, but, the benevolent dictator.
Yes, it does. I mean, I'm not a fan of mass consensus. I don't believe that people are good at making decisions anyway. I think heuristics and biases are and natural selection are the overlords. And so if you ask and I could go on about this forever, so I'll keep this as short as possible, but the amount of the type of answers to questions asked are directly proportional to the type of questions. And so if you go to someone who loves you and cares for you and doesn't want to hurt your feelings and ask them whether or not your new idea has any legs.
Oh, it's brilliant. I really love it.
They're going to say it's brilliant. I really love it. And but equally, if you go to someone who last invested into your company and you lost 100 million of their pounds, they're going to say your idea sucks. So does the idea suck, or is it amazing? And the idea is still the idea. And I'm fearful of gaining too many opinions when opinions are commonplace. What we really need to do is look inside ourselves and think, do I believe in this to such an extent that I would sacrifice my security for it, or potentially sacrifice my friendships for it if they fell away by the wayside? If my bank manager told me that he was no longer, or she was no longer going to give me the overdraft facility, would I still then believe in this idea? Or is the idea conditional to people still loving me and people still backing me financially? And if it's a conditional idea, then that's great. That doesn't mean it's a bad idea. It just means that your purpose for doing this has lots of conditions attached that we need to be cognizant of when we're making our decisions. If, however, you have an idea that you're going to pursue regardless, then it really doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. Now, all of that to one side, gaining advice from experts who've been there and done it is a brilliant idea. I tend to learn from a U-shape of the population, and the U-shape, if you imagine a U-shape over an age demographic, I learn most from people who are very young or very old, and I learn less from people my age. I prefer to learn from someone who's been in business for 20 years longer than me, or 30 years less, and that means that I can gain the insight from the childlike mind of the innocent view of the untainted, or the grey-haired experience of, well, you know what, Jonathan, in the last 465 board meetings that I had, this was the type of thing I observed. And then it's down to your ego, or hopefully your management of ego, as to allowing yourself to listen to those who are either, from the younger to the older in respect, either unqualified to give you advice, which of course they're not, or seemingly out of touch, which of course they're not. Older generations may not necessarily understand how to use Snapchat, but they sure as hell know how to run a P&L. And they sure as hell know how important cash balance is, and when you've got creditors. And they sure as hell know what shareholder agreements stand for. And so, yeah, they may not know, they may think that Twitter is the sound a bird makes, but the truth is the grey hairs are there for experience,
Well, I'm glad I have grey hairs, but unfortunately I don't fit on either side of your U, so I'm being put out of posture here. So, Jonathan, linking in this last part of this chat, because behind the idea of not listening to everybody, I do feel that there is this notion of having a backbone and being in touch with some kind of decision-making process, some kind of stimulus that is yours, because otherwise you're listening to all the winds all the time. So in this metaphor of using a windmill, generally speaking, windmills are fixed in a direction. You build it up and then the blades turn beautifully 360 degrees, but in one cut, as in, facing northwest or southeast. And I was wondering to what extent that is irrelevant in your windmill, because if you position yourself in one way, like in a sailboat, you may get no wind whatsoever. And so how do you position the setting, the compass of the windmill in the first place?
Well, there's bits of the analogy here that are subjective and bits that are literal. And if I were to find the literal parts, you are the windmill, and the mast of the windmill is your backbone. And there is always wind of change. This is the only thing we can guarantee. Therefore, it's actually what the windmill is powering, as opposed to the fact that the windmill is still you. And you are, in terms of teleology, or the telos, our ultimate purpose, one could argue that is the mast of the windmill. That is the thing that's keeping the windmill standing. And I personally believe that if we unlayer ourselves down to our basic essence of being, that is actually still us, and we are the energy components in place, and that's how I view that part of the analogy. Trying to take a literal line off it, I think how we direct the energy that is generated from the winds of change, which can be 360 degrees directed, bearing in mind that the windmill is us and we're the generators of the energy that produce the decisions to go in whatever direction. I think that's one of introspection as well, and looking inside and thinking, what is it, or rather, even if we can, not thinking, but actually being what it is that we truly are. And there's the big struggle with that is that we are prisoners of our thoughts, to use another Frankl term, and we tend to think that we would like to be ... or we think that we believe ... But if we can, and I love meditation as a practice deeply, if we can observe our thoughts, we can see how our thoughts are actually competing for attention. We can see the panel of decision makers. We can see the prison cards, if you like, who are inside us, inside our thinking, essentially throwing forward auditions of what we would class as rational decisions. But of course, within that rationale lies our heuristics and biases. And without those heuristics and biases, we would possibly not have an opinion. And so it's a paradox that requires balance, as all paradoxes do. And that's a very long way of answering your question.
Well, it's been great. Jonathan, I've immensely enjoyed this journey and chatting with you and discovering more about you and Powered by Change. So tell us, how can people get any of your 5 books, including this last best-selling, wonderful Powered by Change?
Well, I would only pay any attention to the most recent 3. The first one I've deleted from the world. The second one is available as a free PDF. All of this is at jonathanmcdonald.com.
And that's with a M-A-C.
M-A-C, yeah. And so like the Kings of Scotland as opposed to the restaurant chain. And I think at jonathanmcdonald.com/books, my books are there. But really, without trying to promote any of my books, my request would be to anyone listening that you now speaking directly to this listener, consider just one question, and that is how ready and willing are you to consider that today is the slowest pace of change you'll ever experience, and feel confident and optimistic about that reality. Because the answer to that question will either guide you, dear listener, to invest more into understanding how to be powered by change, or it's highly likely that this will seem as a nonsensical thesis, and the book is not for those. And so this isn't sadly, and my publishers will chastise me for saying this, although they're probably still hungover from the book awards ceremony. This isn't a general market book. It's only for people who feel that they have achieved 1% of their potential, and they are really happy and comfortable with the uncertainty of future times, because they have a relatively good sense of certainty as to who they truly are. And for those people, it's go to that. You can also go to poweredbychange.com. But for those people, I've written you a handbook. And for the others, I've given you a free of charge beer coaster or kindling for a fire.
That is too funny. Well, notwithstanding what your publisher might feel inclined to quote my musical legend in the form of Jerry Garcia, who once said, "We, the Grateful Dead, are like licorice." So, we're not for everybody, but those who like us love us.
Yes.
And somehow that's what really makes for a great brand. You don't want to be pleasing everybody, and if you know who your target is, then you will deliver.
Indeed. And so if we're going to end on a Grateful Dead quote, I've got several that I could choose from, but I'm going to use 2 just randomly off the top of my head.
Love
the first I'm going to say, without love in the dream, it will never come true. And my second one is going to be, and final to end with, is going to be that there is a road. It's no simple highway between the dawn and the dark of the night.
Wow, that is beautiful. Jonathan, thank you so much for coming on the show and enjoying and sharing those wonderful sayings.
Thank you. And by the way, Minto, I think I can learn a lot from you. And my U-shape is not just in terms of the very old and the very young. It's also in terms of the very experienced and the very inexperienced. And you are most certainly the former in terms of your experience. And it's an absolute honour. Your career and legend has preceded you. And I read your LinkedIn profile with utter dismay that I've achieved not 1/10 of what you. So thank you for inviting me.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks for having listened to this recording of the Minter Dialogue Show. You'll find the show notes and other blog posts on minterdial.com. If you enjoyed the show, please head over to iTunes to give a rating and review. And to finish, here's a song I wrote with Stephanie Singer, A Convinced Man.
A stranger tucked around me, precipitating the danger. To feel free, trust is the reason. Still, I won't toe the line. I sit here passively, hope for your respect, anticipating the thrill of your intellect. Maybe I tell myself there's no use in me lying. I'm a convinced man, building an urge. I'm a convinced man, to live and die submerged. A convinced man, in the arms of a woman. I'm a convinced man, challenge my fate. I'm a convinced man, competition's innate. A convinced man, in the arms of a woman. Despise revenges and struggle to see. Live for the challenge so life's not incomplete. What's wrong with challenge? I know soon we all die. I like the feel of a stranger tucked around me, precipitating the danger. To feel free, trust in my reason, and let me show you why.